So
Well,
I should have asked.
Well, you'll ignore us anyway. You'll be talking to each other. So scoot your seat toward Vicky. Vicky, I'm having you move to your right a little bit.
Okay.
Maybe you guys toward the end more.
Okay.
So I get more of that screen. You're good.
Okay.
You're good. You're good.
Nope.
You're good. Okay. So just a short, welcome, Vicky. Thank you for joining us. Vicky is, what is your title, Vicky?
I'm a volunteer coordinator
Volunteer
for 8th Judicial District Court. I believe I have the email that I sent to you guys there. So
Cheers.
it's not a whole lot of questions, but this is just some that you could choose from.
Thank you, Ms. Vicky.
The one I pointed out, Deshaun, you can choose yourself what was, and I replied back
You wanna
to you
highlight?
was about,
Resilience.
resilience that you talked about with children in foster care and the foster care system in general, and then asking questions about CASA. So the two general, and then go to CASA to wherever you want. I mean, do what you want to do, but that's originally, what did you think, Vicki?
Well, I like the questions about resilience because I think it's such a regular statement, and I think it's misleading.
Great, great.
The other one, I think, was it about services for children?
Yeah, just foster care services in general, speaking to that at a high level, or whatever Deshaun, and Deshaun's work.
Yeah, and I like that question for you, Deshaun, because you have so much history in foster care, and especially with so much conversation happening around the need for additional foster parents as it relates to children, younger children, but the reality is that we need for all of our kiddos. So, and of course, my title is right there under the whatchamacallit.
Yes. So there was three. There was the resilience, services, and then.
And then anything about CASA. She's got a whole list there about CASA. So I'm gonna
Yes.
choose those.
Thank you.
And then I just want to get an individual mic check from everyone. Sean, you go first.
Count 5.
Hello. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
I love it. Sounds great. Thank you,
One
guys.
more thing, Chip, Lonnie.
So at the end of it, I would like to just bring in a call to action, because as we were talking and I was understanding the need for volunteers to do this work, I'd love to say, how can people get involved with CASA or with Children's Advocacy, either one, but just kind of bring that up and discuss both how they can get involved with CASA and how people can get involved with us as well.
And foster, right? And the programs you're doing.
And I just want to click. Can you see the tops of our papers?
Can you see the wide shot at the tops of the papers?
I can only see a little bit.
Okay. I might.
Yeah, you might want to do that.
Oh, the pic- yeah, no.
Well, you can never read
yeah,
it.
Are you going to refer to the paper?
Yes, I plan to.
Okay.
Just in case.
You can't
Bring
read
them
it.
a little bit. Well, let's see. They're in the shot. I'll get them out of the shot. Leave them where they. Put them where they are going to be. That's
Yeah, put them
comfortable
where
for
you're
you.
going to be, and we'll get them out of the shot ourselves.
Okay.
We'll
And-
pop them out. Is there a tissue
And
out
I'll
there?
make sure that we're framing where they're not in there. Okay. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I don't have to put it directly in front of me, but
Just so you can kind of refer.
yep.
Looks great. All right.
I'm getting a tissue. I'm getting a tissue for Deshaun. He's sweating.
Oh.
You're breaking a
What are you
sweat.
sweating for?
1, it's hot, and 2, I'm nervous.
Don't be nervous. Please don't be nervous.
Just from the receptionist, I'll return them where
And
they're.
keep in mind, you guys, where your microphones are. Sometimes
Yes.
we talk with our hands, and we'd like
Do
to
this
do
number
that.
and then you
Yeah,
do
yeah.
that.
Don't do that number.
Yeah, so try, if
Thank you.
They're all
we
stuck
hit
together.
the
I
microphone,
apologize.
I might have to interrupt, and
Okay.
we'll start over, so.
Okay.
Yeah, and we have water over here, Brenda, if you want to.
Did you want to water anybody?
Water, sure, I
Does
guess.
anybody want water?
I'm
You
good.
want water?
The option for water would
I
be
am
great,
good.
but
Here you go.
thank you
Just
so
you
much.
have one close to you.
I don't want to have a coughing or coughing
Yeah,
attack.
never know. You never know.
All right, I am recording everything right
Thank
now,
you.
Brenda,
So again, we'll start out just
alright.
simply, I'm joined with her name and her title. Thank you so much for joining us today on today's podcast. And go into your first question. Let's make it super simple.
And
So
just
you're-
be
Okay.
perfect. That's
It-
all.
They
I'm
edited
asking is for
everything.
you
We
to be
edit
perfect.
everything.
Did
So
Oh,
he introduce
perfect.
himself? His role?
no, he did not. I think
Yeah, so start with that, yeah.
should we do it at the end and have him into camera? That way it'll be less pressure, I think.
All right, so I'm just introducing Vicky right
Yes, you
now.
are.
Okay. Hello.
Right to Vicky.
Oh. Hello, Ms. Vicky. Thank you for joining. Thank you for joining us. Ms. Vicky is the volunteer coordinator with the CASA program.
You can't look at me though.
I'm sorry.
Do you just want to say hello and I just say who I am?
Again.
Okay.
I could either way.
But I'm
Just
introducing
thanks,
Vicky and then
thanks Vicki Wilson for joining us. Vicki is with CASA. Her title, what's your title?
Volunteer coordinator. Okay.
That's okay. We'll do as many times as you want.
Deshaun, it's
not
just
too
like
many.
a Zoom meeting.
It
No
is.
different. You do
I
all
know.
the time, I've seen you.
Hello, Ms. Vicky. Thank you so much for joining us. Ms. Vicky is the volunteer coordinator with the CASA program. And so I have some questions for you today, Ms. Vicky. The first being children, in regards to children's resilience. What are your thoughts about that commonly used statement?
Thank you so much for having me. I believe that it is oftentimes overstated when we think that a child who's experienced trauma will always look the same. I believe that people who have experienced multiple things throughout their childhood that are traumatic, that sometimes end up in foster care and or being removed, oftentimes can find themselves being pretty, what most people would say, normal in a certain environment, whether they're not acting out or not looking the way that people think children would look who've experienced a lot of difficult things. And ultimately, I think that what you experience in your childhood can impact you for the entire rest of your life. And so I think that we really need to be more thoughtful about what we see in adult behaviors, because I've met people in their adult life and I think they're doing just great. They have careers and families and love and life, and they've gone to college and experienced a lot of great things. And if you were to ask them what is missing from their life or what still troubles them, they're going to talk about some type of childhood experience. And so with a really close personal friend, I realized what a great relationship he had with his own biological daughter. And I found out, well, when he was in his 40s, that he was adopted, that he did not get an opportunity to know his birth family. And so his daughter convinced him to go ahead and do a DNA test, and he was able to find his birth family. And the joy and I think the full circle moment that he received once he was able to meet his birth family, even though he had a really good childhood experience. He is biracial and he was raised by a Caucasian family. And so in his adult life is when he met the African American side of his family. And I just never knew that that hole existed in him. And I'm very sure that there are other people who experience those same things, where whether it's because of their career choice or relationships they can have or choose not to have, or some of their behaviors or reaction, it's based on traumatic things that they've experienced, many of whom experienced them in their childhood. And so I just think that sometimes when we talk about resilience, we're really talking about what we think resilience looks like, as opposed to people who've gotten through and still maybe have things that they don't discuss openly that it still impact them as an adult.
Absolutely. And I think when it comes to even foster youth, the perception that foster youth are these super resilient, supernatural youth kids, which to some extent foster youth are resilient. But again, it goes back to what you're saying, it looks different for everyone. And it's definitely a statement that that's different when it comes to each individual youth and each individual person. I think when we talk about youth in foster care, we talk about some of the challenges that they face and them being resilient in everything that they overcome. A lot of the challenges or the struggles that many foster youth face are very similar in many ways to youth that have never entered the foster care system. And so really normalizing a lot of that. This isn't something new. This isn't something that is foreign. These are some of the same issues, and I think really bringing a level of normalcy to what foster care is. It's different, but at the same time, these are kids that are experiencing some of the same things of youth that have never entered the system at all. And so,
yeah, but in foster care, I believe that you have the normal stuff plus.
absolutely.
You know, I think being a young person is difficult, period. But when you're a young person that may have multiple moves and has to run something by a case manager and has an attorney and has a therapist and is unsure if you are going to get to live with your siblings and not sure if you will get to go back home, may or may not have contact with your biological caregivers and or family anymore, that's a different set of circumstances on top
Absolutely.
of. So when people talk about resilience, like let's just say in a school setting, and they say, oh, this child is really resilient, what I think they're saying is I expect a child who's experienced something to have terrible behaviors or
Absolutely.
act out. And you can be a child who's very much so struggling with all of the things that you're experiencing and still go to school and sit there and be quiet and learn yet there's thoughts that are in your head that feel rejected, that feel different, that feel less than, that will always miss the people that were a part of your life. And so I think we need to challenge what we say and or what we think about resilience, because there's going to be someone that's really struggling that looks normal.
Absolutely.
Or with their age equivalent peers. And so I just want to always be mindful of the fact that when children are in foster care, that is not a normal experience, and there will be differences, and we just need to be thoughtful about what we perceive as normal, not normal, healthy, not healthy, because children can still struggle even though we don't know it.
Absolutely, and I think that's the important piece, is in that piece that isn't normal, still normalizing the experience. I think that as someone that aged out of the foster care system, it wasn't normal. But I also appreciated folks that came in, like my CASA worker, my CAP attorney, and those other folks that, though it wasn't part of the quote-unquote normal upbringing, they brought some normal pieces in, that brotherhood, that father figure, that mother figure. And so though it wasn't the typical normal, it definitely brought in a piece that I was missing. And I think for a lot of youth that are in foster care, programs like the CASA Foundation and programs like CAP attorneys, caseworkers, those folks have the ability, which is amazing, to play those normal, quote-unquote normal roles, to bring some level of normalcy. So I do thank you for being here, because I think that is one of the greatest parts about being a CASA, is that you do have the ability to make an impact. I know we're not quite there to that piece yet, but I think it is exciting to talk about all the great things that CASA has done, and the impact that they make truly to the lives of all youth here in Nevada, and those youth that come in contact with them, because it is such an important role, and it's such an important piece that really speaks to, again, this type of normalcy there is, because they do bring that piece. Another question that I have is, what services are needed for children in foster care?
Can I stop you? Let's ask what CASA is.
I was going to circle back to that. I was going to let him keep going, and I was going to do that at the end.
Because you're doing great, and it's fascinating, but I think if we start with what...
Well, we could edit that. That's
okay, either way, but I'd like to know what CASA actually... I mean, we've talked about it, and I know now,
Yes.
but for the people watching and listening...
I didn't know, so that was what I wrote
No,
here.
you're good. And that's why I started just with those ones,
But
because
it's good. I mean, I can edit
gotcha.
that to
No,
the
you're
front of it, so no worries.
Sorry, I want to make sure
Yeah.
we get it in there. Because,
Thank you.
But y'all are doing... This is
Yeah.
really fascinating, so...
Good job.
So tell us about your role with the CASA program.
So, as you mentioned earlier, I'm a volunteer coordinator with the CASA program. I essentially supervise a volunteer workforce that responds to the needs of children, specifically in protective custody and or foster care. So essentially, CASA volunteers play a primary role in two functions. One is that we look to well-being. The next is permanency. So our primary goal is to ensure timely permanency, and while the child is in protective custody, ensure that their well-being needs are being addressed.
Very nice. So, CASA program. How is someone able to? How are kids referred over to CASA, or how do they get involved with CASA?
Okay, so we exclusively serve children that are in protective custody and or foster care. So the first thing that will happen is that a condition and or a concern is brought to the attention of a child welfare agency. The child welfare agency gets involved. A judge will determine one way or the other if the case needs to stay open, if the child needs to stay in care. If the judge makes that decision, the child will stay in protective custody. Now there's a couple of things that need to happen. We need to set up the parameters and to discuss the conditions for return. What must happen in order for this child to go home? Is that the best option? And if it's not the best option, what are the other permanency options that will come into play? And I think that's the world that CASA volunteers live in. It's not black and white. It is not a 60-minute show that gets resolved with some superhuman person that solves all problems. It takes a long time to really sort through best interests and permanency. And so CASA Volunteers, which stands for Court Appointed Special Advocate, is just that. A court will ask, once they've decided that a case will open, that an advocate be assigned to the case. Typically, CASA volunteers represent one child or one sibling group at a time, and their goal is to stay with that case until permanency is achieved. Their time in the case is spent building relationships, seeing the child at least once a month, but most of our CASA volunteers see their child more regularly, determining whether or not there's any problems in the case where there's a gap that can be filled or where a need has to be addressed, or it should be discussed either with the judge or with someone else on the team. And they go back to court on average once every 6 months to really report to the judge about what's happening in the case and to make recommendations so that the judge can finally say, okay, this is what I think that we should be working on for the next 6 months, or address any concerns that are brought to their attention.
That is amazing. So how would someone that wants to be a volunteer, what do they do? How can a normal person become a volunteer with CASA?
Yeah, so first of all, most of our volunteers do not have like a legal background or a child welfare background. They are really people that believe that children deserve normalcy in their childhood. They want to bring common sense into the courtroom, and they're okay with having an opinion. That is different from others, because on many occasions and on many days, your opinion might be different from other people that are connected to your child. So if someone wants to know more about the program, they can simply go to casalasvegas.org. Again, that's casalasvegas.org, and that will lead you to our main page. If you click on the volunteer link, it will give you a step-by-step guide on how to become a CASA volunteer. Very first step is just simply send us your contact information. You will then be invited to an orientation where we will do a 1-hour virtual meeting to discuss the CASA program, because there's a lot of people who want to help children in foster care. Maybe this is the best fit for you. Maybe there are other opportunities that are a better fit based on your time, your skill set, because this is a commitment. CASA volunteers are expected to be around for at least a 2-year commitment, and it's because we want to see the case through permanency, and that's either a child going back home, which is through reunification, guardianship, meaning that someone takes on responsibility of that like parenting role, but legally the child or sibling group is still connected to their birth family. Termination of parental rights and adoption essentially means that the legal rights are terminated and then attached to someone else. And then we have UPLA or APLA, means other planned permanent living arrangement, and that's reserved for children that are a little bit older. 16 and older, the team may say, you know what, we need to start preparing this child for independent options after care, because for whatever reason, one of the other permanency options is not working out. And so the CASA volunteer will regularly make recommendations on what they feel is in that child's best interest and report that back to the courts, and our goal is to stay there until permanency is achieved.
That is amazing. I can't say enough great things about the CASA program. I truly, like I said, I benefited from it years ago, and the effects of it still resonate today. I think it is, for those folks that want to get involved and really volunteer, you really are making an impact in the lives of young people. What are the age ranges that a CASA volunteer could expect to get?
We will work with any child between the ages of 0 through 18 that's in protective custody. Some people are a bit concerned about representing a nonverbal child, or they say, how can you do that? This child cannot speak. The reality is that you can, through great research, relationships, seeing your child face to face, you literally can figure out what's going on in this child's life and make a recommendation around best interests without having a child verbalize something to you. So you mentioned earlier like having a CAP attorney as well. And some people are a little bit confused about what a CASA volunteer does in the courtroom versus what a CAP does in the courtroom. So I will clarify that right now. So a CAP attorney stands for Children's Attorney Project, which works through Legal Aid Center. They are assigned to the client to protect their legal interests and represent the child's interests, their client's interests. So if a child says they want something, let's just say a child says, I want to eat at this fast food restaurant every single day. I want to do this. I want to go to Disneyland on the weekends. A CAP attorney honestly should go to court and represent what that client says that they want. A CASA volunteer should know what the client says they want, but they should advocate for best interests, and that doesn't always align. A 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 17-year-old can clearly want something that is not in their best interest. And so sometimes they are the same and sometimes they're different. A CASA volunteer doesn't necessarily have a legal background. As a matter of fact, most of our CASA volunteers do not, because they're really there to bring common sense into the courtroom. Would a common person, if they had relationships with this child and this team, did great research, had a great relationship with this child, what would be their interest? And that was the whole concept behind the original CASA program. In 1977 was the original program.
Wow.
In Seattle, Washington. And a judge was overseeing a case, and he said, you know what? We have a lot of great people in the courtroom, but what we are missing is that singular voice to focus on best interest of children. We have many people that care about children. There are people that have child welfare backgrounds. There are attorneys. There are people that are representing the whole family. or people that are trying to accomplish a singular task. That would be like, I'm trying to complete an adoption. I'm trying to process something that's necessary for the case. He said, we need someone to take a holistic approach. We need someone who is connected to everything and has a singular focus and priority on the child's best interests. And so he was able to recruit his first 50 volunteers with help from his bailiff. And since 1977, we now have over 900 chapters across the nation. And we are lucky. We were early adapters to the CASA program. In 1980, Judge Mendoza started our program here. And he said, there's some great things going on. There's some advocates that are helping children, and we could use this extra voice, this extra set of eyes on this case. And since our original program from 1980 with the original 15 volunteers, we have nearly 370 today. That is nice growth, but the reality is, as you know, we have over 3,000 children in protective custody. So at no time are we able to have a CASA advocate for every child that should benefit from one. And legally, we are supposed to provide an advocate, a CASA volunteer, for every child that's in protective custody. So our goal as a program is to get to a point where we have enough volunteers so that every child can benefit from this advocate.
That's amazing. You also speak to a great need. One question before I get to the needs is CASA statewide? So is it a chapter in the north and also in the rural areas?
That is correct. We have multiple CASA or advocate programs throughout the state of Nevada, and we also have a statewide director that manages at a higher level to kind of try to meet the needs of those local programs. Clark County happens to be the largest program that we have in the state, so, but we also have the largest number of children in protective custody as well.
So someone in the rural areas, if they are in need of a CASA, they're able to reach out, and then you'll give us that information, but they're able to reach out and get a CASA.
Absolutely. Well, they can reach out to our state director. So there's a couple of components. Wanting to be a CASA volunteer in those other jurisdictions, each one of them kind of has their own process for onboarding.
Okay.
But our goals are very similar, meeting the needs of children in foster care. Versus someone who wants a CASA volunteer. I know here in the southern Nevada part, literally anyone on the team, if they are in court, they can ask for a CASA volunteer, or they can reach directly out to the CASA program. They can call, they can email, but if they want to call, the number is 455-CASA. I mean, 702-455-CASA. Doesn't get much easier than that. If you are confused about jurisdiction, stuff of that nature, you are welcome to honestly reach out to us. We will redirect you to whatever program that you need if you just happen to be like a little bit confused as far as which program can assist you. But we also have a statewide website as well that's run by Ms. Jane, who does the state program.
That's amazing. So when it comes to the need for volunteers, so there's two questions that I'm going to ask. The first being the need for volunteers. I know you said that there is, as we know, there's more than 3,000 youth that are in foster care in the state. But there's even a less amount of actual volunteers. And so there's not enough volunteers to represent every youth that are currently in the foster care system, right?
That is correct. So we have to prioritize. We literally look at the cases because the judge essentially says, yes, I agree that a CASA volunteer should be on this case, and we get what's called a CASA order. And then from that, our department receives it, and our program receives it. But because we don't have a CASA volunteer assigned to it, essentially one of our supervisors will monitor that case, and she will bring it to our attention when a case could really benefit from that CASA volunteer. We also have graduations. That tends to be when we match the most amount of cases, because as you're going through training as a CASA volunteer, our team will select a case for you. So right now, I believe we have about 30 volunteers that will go through our next class. So when they graduate, there will be 30 separate cases if all of them move through the process, 30 separate cases that can be assigned to that class. And for cases, we either consider an individual child or a sibling group.
That's great. So there's clearly a need. We definitely need folks to volunteer, and you can be anywhere in the rural areas. What I want to speak to now is your thoughts on some of the services that are needed for youth in foster care. So what do you see as being some of the greatest needs and services that foster youth need?
That is a very big question. I believe that a lot of people, when they talk about services, they're looking for a single solution, or they hope that there'll be a single solution. Like if we do this one thing, it'll solve all problems. The reality is that every case is situational, and even if our involvement is a very similar reason, when you peel back the layers of each case, there's likely going to be something that is unique and specific to that family. I mean, I can speak in general terms. If we had better mental health services, that would definitely assist with a lot of our families. If we had more substance abuse treatment services, that would be very helpful to many of our families. If we had better services just for children in general, more foster parents for older, younger, larger sibling groups would absolutely be great, because the reality is that while we're working on all of this, children need a safe place to be. They need people that are going to protect them and have that caregiver protective capacity that didn't exist in whatever environment they were removed from. We need more advocates. I think we just need better general awareness that some children and some families are really struggling. And if you see and or assume that something might be going on, reach out to the appropriate authorities to bring it to our attention, because I'm sure for all of the things that we do see, there are other things that don't get reported. And so just being more aware that families are struggling and children are struggling, and just figure out, what are you in a position to do? For some people, it might be more event-based opportunities. For others, it's more something like a CASA volunteer where you build a relationship over an extended period of time. For other people, it might be something else, as like an educational advocate or something that's more specific to a particular role. Just figure out what you're in a position to do and make the decision to move forward.
Absolutely. I think in addition to those, I think when it comes to services, it's providing those opportunities specifically for youth that are transitioning out of the foster care system to get employment. And so I think there's a lot of employers out there where foster youth or youth with foster care experience would be great in. I think the community has the ability to really look at, again, where they can provide, where they can support, whether that be with respite care, where the children are placed there temporarily, whether that be with being an actual foster parent, whether that be with being a CASA, a volunteer. There's so many opportunities to really provide assistance and support to youth in the foster care system. I think it's also looking at where can you step in and really be that mentor. Rather, CASA may not be your go-to. What other avenues out there could you support a youth educationally? They have educational liaisons. Where can you support youth when it comes to employment? One of the greatest things that I think I had was a foster dad that provided me with employment opportunities. He provided me with housing when I needed it. But he was also there and consistent. And I think as we start to look at how we can support youth and how we can support specifically youth transitioning out of the foster care system, mentors, because once youth age out of the system, and we're in a place where we're looking at extending foster care to the age of 21. But until we get to that point, even beyond that, how can folks step in and provide that mentorship, that one-on-one? And that's one of the things that I do like about CASA, is that they don't necessarily only end when the child turns 18, but there is some communication that happens even well after that, and some follow-up that happens to see how the youth are doing authentically. And I think that's one of the, another important piece is the authentic engagement that CASA does bring to youth and to families. And to connecting them also with resources. You mentioned the graduation, the class that you all have of new CASAs coming in. That's an important piece. And I think that's one piece that has to be highlighted, is that these are normal, regular people that are choosing to make a difference in the lives of foster youth, or youth in general, by just speaking up and being there and being present. One of the questions that I have is how are youth matched with a volunteer?
So the initial decision will be made while the volunteer is in training. So there are multiple stages in which you will be asked as a CASA applicant, what is your desire? So you will be asked on the initial application, do you have any other volunteer experience? What are you thinking as far as your role as a CASA volunteer? When you go through training, you will be asked a few times, can you clarify, what do you think you'd be a great match for? So we talk about younger children, older children. We also talk about disposition and disabilities. And then our training coordinator, who's our lead, her name is Cheryl. She'll get to know you pretty well, because our training is about 30 hours of in-class. And then there's what we call road work that will be done outside of the classroom. So she'll get a sense of who you are. There's also an interview process where there are multiple people who will sit on your panel. We will likely discuss your childhood, your professional experience. So sometimes things just work out to where you're like, you know what? This person lives in Henderson. They're a retired teacher. They love soccer. We have this other kid who lives in Henderson, would love to play sports, this, that, the other. It's like, wow, that would be a great match. So sometimes we look at proximity, background, professional interests, social interests. There just may be a common connection between the CASA volunteer and the child that we say, hey, we think that they could relate to that. And so a lot of things go into that decision-making process when we decide to match the CASA volunteer with the first case. And then after that, the applicant or who's now a CASA volunteer has an opportunity to let their supervisor know when they're ready to consider another case. Usually most CASA volunteers will do it after their first case is open. One case closes, another case will open. Most of my volunteers, I'll be honest, they ask me to select cases for them. They're so used to it. And so I will take my time. It's a very thoughtful process for me. I don't do that quickly because it is likely going to be a lifelong connection. CASA volunteers, as you've mentioned, some of our CASA volunteers have lifetime relationships with their children. And so I'm very thoughtful about what would be a good match to be a lifelong connection for this child and for this CASA volunteer. So, but yeah, it happens authentically after that first case. If the CASA volunteer chooses to self-select, or the supervisor can select the child for the CASA volunteer. But in the beginning processes, we look at a lot of different information, and we have so many children that are waiting, and we just go literally case by case, and we look to see what we think is the best match for that applicant.
What I think is amazing is the relationships that are built. One of the unfortunate pieces about a foster care system is that it teaches, in a sense, relationships that are being destroyed, but it doesn't teach about building relationships and maintaining relationships. And I think that's one of the unique pieces about the CASA program, is that it does have this component of building relationships and understanding that you can get the most work done when relationships are built. And I think as volunteers stay on and they get to know their youth and their young people, they're building and developing this amazing relationship. From time to time I see my CASA and we still have a good relationship. And so I think it's those beautiful pieces that really make an impact in the lives of young people. And so there's a need. So we know that there's over 3,000 youth in the foster care system. How many volunteers do you need?
You know, a lot of variables will go into how many are needed so that we can serve every child. I mean, off the top of my head, I would probably say we need anywhere between a ballpark of 1,000 to 1,500 to be in a better position to serve every child. Many of our CASA volunteers represent larger sibling groups. I've seen sibling groups as large as 9, 10, 11,
Wow.
12. For a lot of those cases, we'll end up having to break it up and do what we call a co-CASA, have multiple people represent the same case. Unless the children are in the same home, it may be very difficult to find a volunteer if kiddos are split within 3, 4 different homes, and have a volunteer who has to go around to all of them, because a program requirement is that you see your child at least once a month face to face. Most of our CASA volunteers see their children more than once a month. So I could only imagine having to represent multiple children and be in multiple places. So, but yeah, I'm sorry, could you repeat the question again? I'm sorry, I forgot.
No, you are fine. I was asking, and it wasn't a question that was written down.
Okay, no.
How many do you need?
How many do
Yes,
you need?
how many
Thank
do you
you.
need? Yes, that was the original question. Okay, perfect.
So, and then I just lost my question. So we understand there's this need. We understand that there's more than enough folks. If you want to come, there's at least over 1,000 volunteers needed to become CASAs.
Absolutely, and I know that this is a community that responds. I mean, I have been blessed to be a volunteer manager in 3 different capacities for this community. One of them being with American Red Cross. I was the volunteer manager during the 1 October incident. I also then was pulled over to assist the fire department with the COVID-19 response initially. And then I chose to be a part of CASA. And one thing I know about this community is that it's a community that cares. It cares about people, it cares about families, and it will respond. And so I think with CASA, a lot of people, I don't believe, are aware that this opportunity is here for people to be an advocate and to step up. I think a lot of times when people hear about foster care, they know maybe about 1 or 2 things. You can either be a case manager because they've seen it on television, or you can be a foster parent or an adoptive parent. They don't really know that these other opportunities exist to serve the same population of children. and how to get involved. So I want to put a name to that. I want some brand recognition behind CASA, Court Appointed Special Advocate, people who are advocates for children in foster care who want to see positive outcomes, because we believe that children deserve normal childhood experience and timely permanence. And timely can be a funny word in child welfare. I've seen children come into care as infants and exit out of the foster care at the age of 18. For most cases, that is too long and that is too much. I believe that there are a lot of great foster parents. I sit on the board of Foster Change. I am with foster parents quite a bit. I think I'm the only person who's a part of it that's not a foster parent or a caregiver, because I believe in the mission. But make no mistake, long-term foster care was never intended to be a long-term placement solution for children in foster care. Children deserve to know where the end of the road is. And end of the road is related to permanency. It should not be ambiguous who I'm going to live with, who's going to take care of me. Those types of things should not change all the time. And it's different than people saying, oh, well, I went and stayed with my grandma over the summer. Well, you knew you were going back home.
Right.
There are some children that will enter foster care and will never see their birth family again. There are children that I've seen that have been in over 20 placements and they have never had contact with any of their previous placements. That is weird. That is not normal. If you've never had a lasting connection with anyone connected to your life, I don't know how you become a normal adult or a normal functioning adult and relate to those types of adult relationships that are lifelong. You know, how do you apply that when you've never seen it in your childhood? And so I think we owe it to children. Childhood can be difficult in general. Being in foster care is just another layer that can be extremely difficult. And I think we need to find a way to take these very adult problems and pull them off of children. I literally see 2- and 3-year-olds that have adult-sized problems. And that's not okay and it's not fair. So whatever we can do to help make this experience called foster care better, because there are things that we can't erase. There's abuse that has happened to children. I cannot take that away from them. They will at some level remember it. Some of them will have behaviors related to it. I can't fix that, but I can hopefully get to a place where I can give them better outcomes for a future. And that's the direction that we're going. All this other stuff has already happened. So how do we figure out how to make the now stable and create a better future for children in foster care?
Will, with what she's saying, can you intersperse any of what you were in the foster system? Can you relate to anything that she's saying? I mean, adding your own antidote, I think, it would be a nice sort of like a back and forth to back up, what Ms. Vicky is saying.
It is, and you actually caught me because I was actually going there. So
Good,
we're right on.
Good.
I think when it comes to many of those challenges that youth in foster care face, it absolutely is. You spoke to a point of how foster care, it's not what it was intended to be. It wasn't supposed to be this long-term thing. And I think there is this piece that there has to be a shift and there has to be a change in the foster care system in general. It was never intended to be exactly what it is, which is this long-term system, which is partially why we have many of the challenges that we have. I think it goes to, even looking at my experiences in the foster care system, it was because the system wasn't designed to be this long-term issue and has these challenges. I think one of my challenges was really connecting and building those relationships. And I think at the end of it all, it boils down to relationships, and it boils down to what we as a community what we as a state want from our child welfare system. I think there is tremendous changes that has to happen, but it has to come from, everyone has to be in agreement and in alignment with it. And I think it stops from just talking about it and it being a conversation that we have at conferences and that we have in podcasts and all these different settings. And then it moves from actually talking about it to actual action. And I think that's the biggest shift that has to happen when it comes to child welfare issues in general. From someone that has experienced the foster care system, that has sat on numerous boards, that have did my fair share of advocating nationally, the biggest issue that I see is, or the biggest challenge I see is that systems not there's not enough resources, and there's not enough manpower, and there's a lot of great hearts, but there's not enough support to go into programs and into really building up the child welfare systems to the capacity in which they could be. But it starts off fundamentally with the foundation of the child welfare system itself, and looking at how can we really change it to be exactly what it necessarily wasn't designed to be, but what it's turning into be. No one likes to be. I was in foster care for a little over 4 years. Definitely not as long as some other youth and young people. But in that 4 years, I learned that my biggest support was those folks that were there consistently, that took time to develop those relationships, that remained consistent. But I also found in those 4 years plus during my advocacy work was that it takes a system that invests in itself. And it takes a state, and it takes the community coming together to rally around youth and young people. There's this story that I speak on all the time about the little boy and the starfish, and it sits with me because it talks to the importance of how it takes one person to make a difference. And the story talks about a little boy and him throwing starfish into the ocean. And when I think about that story, I look at foster youth and youth in general as being those starfish. And me now being older, the community representing that little boy, that have the ability to pick up that starfish, to dust them off, and to throw them back into the ocean and give them one more chance. And so when we talk about some of the needs, when we talk about some of the challenges that foster youth face, when we talk about how can the community as a whole step in, CASA is one big piece of it. But I think there's all these other parts that have to come into play when it comes to the overall well-being of a child, when it comes to the child welfare system in general. We can prevent to some degree youth entering into the system when it comes to preventative services. But then when it comes to youth navigating the system itself, ensuring that there are resources that are put into place, and that there are if there's resources put into place. And so I think that's one of the exciting pieces, again, of having the CASA volunteers and having the CASA program itself being a part of the lives of young people. Like I said, I can't say enough. I cannot not say enough great things about the CASA program, because, like I said, I benefited from it. I think it is phenomenal. I enjoy the folks that lead it because their hearts are there. There's passion in there. One of the things you mentioned was that you don't just quickly assign youth and to adults, volunteers. That's amazing. So you take time to actually make sure that there's a match that happens.
Yeah, our ability to help children in foster care only extends as far as my ability to recruit volunteers that are willing to step up and be an advocate on behalf of this child. So I don't take lightly, because we ask as a program that you commit to at least a 2-year commitment. The reality is, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of our volunteers extend well past that as far as that relationship of being involved with that child. To include, some of our children go back home to their birth families and they are still connected to that child. Some children exit the foster care, some children are adopted, some children go into some type of guardianship arrangement. And so I don't take lightly that could be a lifelong relationship, and just really want to be thoughtful about how we match. And as far as like the system as a whole, I mean, I don't work in, although I have a lot of history with child welfare, I don't work in all of the systems, nor have I worked in all of them. I think there are a lot of people who are trying really hard to have positive outcomes for children. What I will say is that I don't believe that the problem that exists is one entity and or one person to solve.
Absolutely.
I think that it requires everyone to think about the part that they can be active in, and that literally could just simply be being a supporter, having a business and saying, hey, if you ever need to have an orientation in this neighborhood, somebody just let me know, it's yours. It could be promoting an opportunity to work with children in foster care. There are many opportunities to work with this subset of kiddos that are experiencing removal from their parents due to abuse, neglect, and abandonment. So figure out what you can do. Is your opportunity exists with being an advocate, and that of course would be as a CASA volunteer, or an educational advocate, that would be through Legal Aid Center, or a foster parent, that's managed through the Department of Family Services, or some of the event-based stuff, that could be foster kinship. I mean, there are so many people that help this group of kiddos, which is why you can speak to being on lots of different committees and boards. I mean, and that's because we all get together collectively, typically to do at least one thing a year for some reason. But to help out as that advocate and have that relationship piece that you speak to is unique, and it is wonderful, because for so many children, what is needed is very, very different. And so having that person to do the research, build the relationships, ask clarifying questions, be brave, be bold, but also be vulnerable in a way that allows you to really understand what this child and what this family might be experiencing, so that you can go out and figure out what the needs are. And I've had CASA volunteers who've had 20 cases, and they never have had the same recommendation based on what the needs were and the time that they were involved in the case, and that's because it can always be very different. So, you know, looking at every case as an individual, every child as an individual, and basically saying, what can I do? And for every CASA volunteer, that's going to be a different strength. From people that are really great with court reports and relationship building to people that are really great with research. But one thing that they have in common is that they want better outcomes for children in foster care, and better outcomes related to permanency and well-being.
So,
Sean, I'm going to have you blot. You're sweating up a
thank
storm.
you. I
It's
am.
not going to look good on camera. I want it to look good. My friend,
Thank you.
I know that it's hot.
It is warm in here. All right.
Okay, see, just hit this corner one more time. One more.
Thank you. Okay.
Hey, if I had
Good job.
lipstick on my teeth, I'd expect you to tell me that
That's
too.
right.
So we're all good.
That's
Because
right.
I am, it's warm.
So how long because I feel like we've been.
It's long.
Yeah, so.
You
if
okay?
Yeah.
If there's, what do you feel like we've missed? Let's start there. Is there something?
Besides air conditioning.
Yeah. I mean, is there something we're missing that's important? I mean, I think if I understand it, that's how I always say it, because you all are closer to it than I am. That's helpful. Like, I understand what CASA does.
Do we want to clarify, can one person make a difference? Because I think a lot of people feel like, well, what's one more?
Yeah.
I think that that's a good way to end it. So when you say, can one person make a difference, she can go into that a little bit. Of course, one person can make a difference, right? And if someone wants to volunteer, where can they go?
Okay.
And then thank you, Vicki, for joining us today.
Okay.
We've kind of said the call to actions. I don't know if I want to call
We
it that.
did.
But what do you think?
Yeah, I
Just
mean, we
one
did
person?
do it already. It just
Yeah.
depends on where you
Yeah.
want to put it in. We may
But it
not,
doesn't
we
hurt
may
to,
cut that out.
it doesn't hurt to do it again.
Right, because you can decide where you want to use
Yeah.
it.
So.
Okay, so Vicki, so we have some call to actions. The first, and I definitely want to highlight, is there's 2 youth groups that youth are able to get involved in if they're in the foster care system. One is called Foster and Adopted Youth Together, commonly known as FATE, and they are Clark County's Foster Youth Advisory Board. So youth of any ages, really 10 plus, are able to get involved in this. This is a youth advocacy program group made up of current and former foster youth that have decided to come together, not only to have fun, which is the biggest piece of it, but also to make changes within the foster care system. Out of this group, part of this group, came the Foster Care Bill of Rights, the Sibling Bill of Rights, and so it has done some amazing work. The other group is Nevada Life Youth Advisory Board, which is also it's the State Youth Advisory Board, and it is the same group made up of current and former foster youth that are making a change within the foster care system here in the state. And so definitely want to put those 2 out. And so youth that are able and wanting to get involved in those groups definitely can reach out to myself, to CAA, and we can connect you with those 2 youth groups. But I also want to see, what are some of your call to actions? One question that I want to ask you is, can one person make a difference?
I'm sure it's the only thing that ever did. One person deciding to do something different on behalf of children in foster care. That one person could be that foster parent. The one person could be that CAP attorney. The one person could be that judge that builds a special connection with the child and family. But in my instance, and now, it's the CASA volunteer. It's that one person that makes that decision that they're going to be involved, they're going to be engaged, they're going to figure it out, and they're going to come back. Sometimes people are a bit concerned, like, what if I make the wrong choice? Well, guess what? The decisions and choices that you make on Monday may change by Wednesday, and that's fine. And you'll report that new information on Wednesday. Ultimately, it's the judge that makes the large decisions. It's just a recommendation that we give. But what a powerful recommendation to give to someone who's had the level of contact. CASA volunteers tend to be, for children that stay in foster care a little bit longer. Research has shown that in many of those cases, the CASA volunteer has that longest relationship. I review CASA reports all the time. It is not uncommon to see a CASA volunteer have over 100 contacts within a 6-month period. Not exclusively with the child, it could be with the case manager, the attorney, the school, but on no other reports have I seen that level of contact. So when that one person is doing those things, it absolutely makes a difference to the well-being and permanency of a child in foster care. And as far as reaching out to the CASA program, you're always welcome to reach out 24 hours a day at casalasvegas.org. Again, that's casalasvegas.org. You are also welcome to call the CASA program, and our telephone number is 702-455-CASA. That's 702-455-2272.
Thank you so much. So you all heard it here. Ms. Vicki, the volunteer coordinator with the CASA program. If you want to get involved, contact Ms. Vicki or contact casa.org, and they will definitely be able to get you connected and get you connected with some youth. So thank you, Ms. Vicki, for joining us.
Thank you so much for this opportunity.
That was great. All we have left is this intro, but we don't have the whole Vicky and the sheet for that. That's why I was trying
Knocked
to.
it out of the park. You
Yeah, that was
two.
beautiful.
wonderful.
It's a lot of great information.
You are phenomenal.
I
Oh,
started
thank
out not
you.
knowing anything, and now I know everything, I feel like.
And I love you put your last things in, and that was perfect.
Yeah.
That was great.
Yeah, that's,
Wow.
yeah.
Vicky, do you wanna come out?
No, we're good.
He just do his
Yeah,
intro,
yeah.
not have us all stare at him while he does that. He knows who he is.
Ms. Vicki, I need to learn from you.
No, you're good.
You're great.
I appreciate the opportunity, and thank you so much.
You're welcome. I enjoyed the Hey, really did.
I have wonderful, wonderful volunteers
I bet.
that make me proud.
I bet. And, you know, it seems to me like the number of hours that they put in as volunteers is tremendous.
You know what? Believe it or not, most CASA volunteers only spend anywhere between 8 to 15 hours per month.
Oh, wow.
No, because they're not the primary caregiver. So it's not like the foster parent who has to do day-to-day care. It's not the guardian. That's the Department of Family Services. It's more or less like, hey, Mom, how's it doing? How's school going? Okay, see you this next